Welcome to Safeguarding Redefined, a podcast by Cornerstone Safeguarding. We'll be exploring a range of topics from child protection to adult safeguarding and everything in between. Please note some of the topics we'll be discussing may be sensitive in nature and may trigger strong emotions.
So, Chris, your experience as a DSL is a role that I've never had before, so I'm going to quiz you on what it's like. First off, what is your experience, and tell me a little about what it looked like.
So I have been working within safeguarding now for about 16 years. Love the job. It's very varied. It can be sometimes exciting, rewarding, but then there are a lot of elements of the role which are quite tough. If you don't watch yourself, then you can actually absorb too much of the role.
So what are you doing like day to day in a DSL role? What does that look like?
Well, that's the thing. It's very, very difficult. And I know a lot of people will agree with me on this one, that you can't turn up in the morning and go, I'm exactly going to be doing this, and this today. It can actually sometimes be unpredictable. Whenever I'm working with people and support through Cornerstone with their role as a DSL, I try and go for the proactive approach. So we make sure that there's procedures in place so that if something does come up, and it regularly does, because you do have to a certain extent be reactive, that you know full well what you're going to be doing, how you're going to manage it straight from there, rather than just in panic station having to just straight away deal with it. So if I was to really give a structure to it, in the morning, the first thing you do is you check your list of students who are open concerns.
Right.
And you would check the status. You'd also potentially check up with them. This is within a school context. If it is in a charity organisation context, the similar kind of format, you would check over your live cases and work out what needs to be done there and then, who's involved with it. And you always need to be on top of it. You need to be actually have it in your mind what essentially you need to do to make sure that it comes to a successful or positive outcome.
Yeah. So from my understanding and from watching you as a mate and colleague at times, but also watching other DSLs, there's lots of meetings, lots of interaction with different services across the board, multi-team sort of stuff. Yeah. So it is super varied, but very stressful at times. And so you could probably go on about your experience, but I guess just summarize the main challenges. Like, what would be your top 3 challenges that DSLs face?
You know what? It's obviously we don't script this, and so asking what does the DSL do on a daily basis, I was thinking, that's a really difficult question. But yes, challenges-wise, I'd say absorbing too much. I've mentioned that quite a few times in previous. It's so easy to do that because you're so focused on understanding the emotion and having overwhelming empathy. Because that really helps you to carry on. But you have to have it you have to be very clever in the way that you master it, that you don't have too much empathy. Yeah,
you obviously care for the people that you're safeguarding, but you can step in too much into their lives.
You have to make really tough decisions, and you can't let that cloud your judgment. You have to have a professional judgment. So I'd say that having too much empathy, that can be a challenge. Absorbing too much and having the vicarious trauma, which is essentially that you've taken too much on, it's affected you, and you essentially feel the emotions that that person would themselves, especially for abuse victims. That is a very, very tough one. And that's one thing I struggled with a lot over the years. But one of the most common ones that I think are a major challenge is avoiding burnout.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But I guess just one thing I'm interested in your experience, because you're talking about having things proactively in place. From my perspective as someone not in the role, I think one of the challenges I'd face if I was to step into that role is how much policy and procedure I would need to put into, if it's not in place, like how do you put that in place? So would that be another common challenge, just dealing with the number of policies? And
yeah, there's a lot of legislation out there. There's a lot of guidance documents that you have to abide by. And yes, you can't fit everything into a safeguarding policy. I mean, I've been to places where their policy is about 40, 50 pages long. And I kind of go, well, that's great.
Who's going to read it?
That's the problem. It's like, you need to have it in place. But who's going to read it? So yes, having different policies and procedures, even if they do amount to like having 10 different ones for different specific areas, it's a good idea to have that in place. But yes, it is very difficult. You have to have procedures in place. So at the end of the day, you are protecting not only yourself, the people that are there in your care, but you're protecting the organization.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure you have robust policies and procedures in place. And as a DSL, to make sure that you're across all of that and making sure it's enforced or monitored, reviewed, updated whenever it needs to. So, for example, when working together to safeguard children, and the updates came out just before Christmas last year, and then a week later the prevent ones came up, you're literally going into January going, great, this is what we need.
Yeah, trying to keep up with it all and actually know what the changes are. So burnout is where we kind of want to focus this conversation going into. You talked a little bit about vicarious trauma and over empathizing. What does burnout look like then? Assuming you've experienced it.
Yes,
well.
that is. You know what? Cornerstone, to a certain extent, was born out of that. I was looking for a new career because at that point it was about 14 odd years of being on the front line. I was done. You know, it took until that point to have my first ever experience of supervision. So you can imagine going through that many years of dealing with really, really tough stuff. And at one point during the lockdown, actually, I was on my own because either furlough or staff illness. There were 4 months where I was managing a 3-campus university college on my own.
Yeah,
I had increased responsibilities, long hours, and loneliness. That was one thing that absolutely got me. And so when we were thinking about Cornerstone and what it would stand for, what it would be, it was about making sure that people didn't get to the stage where I experienced. And so it's convenient actually going on to that, because there was a poll I put out on LinkedIn earlier this year actually, and I said, which areas of safeguarding do you find the most challenging? And the top ones came up as building safeguarding culture, but the one that was by far the most was avoiding burnout. So it's not just an experience that I've had, it's actually across the board. And when you ask the question, what does it look like? Well, for me, I started getting decreased job satisfaction. I was thinking, right, I need to find a new career. I can't deal with this. My physical and mental health took a massive nosedive as well, especially lockdown. I wasn't able to get out. And so I'm stuck in my room dealing with all of this pretty horrendous things, and it jumped up. But at one point it went up by 50% more concerns that we had through it, and trying to navigate a world that everyone who's listening to this will have experienced this as well. I had major sleeping problems. I was not eating properly, and I didn't see this coming, and I felt really, really stupid afterwards, going, how did I not notice that, and why didn't I put something in sooner? Because it took me a long time after things kind of settled down. I got more staff.
I think that's the key thing, is it? Is settled down and you had some space to reflect. Like when you're frontline staff and things are relentless, you don't have that important pause. And then when there's stresses at home, like the pandemic, you're in each other's space, whatever. That extra stress, you do feel like a fool when you have space to reflect on it. But that's the problem. Burnout generally has come from a place where you don't have that space. And you see it too late. So there's a lot there that you've talked about. The impact's clearly negative. Generally, burnout leads to worse decision-making skills. It leads to poor communication skills.
It puts people you're supposed to be caring for in danger. Yeah, let's just be honest. Because I was at a stage where I wasn't able to make. I was still able to do my job. Yeah. But then I'm glad I had accountability partners in place. I made sure that in any job I have accountability partners who know exactly what I'm doing, any decisions I'm making. But if I didn't have them kind of stepping in every now and then going, I don't think you quite saw this. And I was missing out different detail. And when you're doing safeguarding, that is such a dangerous place.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we could go on just about burnout, but let's go into the more proactive side of things then. So looking at DSL staff, safeguarding staff, generally, or frontline staff, but most particularly the DSL, what can a leadership do to change the culture where that leads to burnout?
There's quite a few things they can do. Firstly is show an interest in the safeguarding team, so that there's not forget that a DDSL is qualified to the same level as a DSL. There might be a difference in the experience, but the fact is they're just as important.
The extra D is deputy, right?
Yes, okay. Yeah. I keep forgetting to mention this.
That's all good. I'm happy to clarify.
So I think that one of the best things is check in, not check up. One thing I absolutely detested, but when you're feeling at your lowest or when you're struggling the most, when someone keeps going, what are you doing at the moment? What are you doing? What was that? And they probably meant it from a good place and actually wanting to know, but actually it became a bit tough. So actually when someone would say to me, let's have a chat.
Yeah.
Then I felt more open. It's more of a supervision kind of approach. Which is like, I was quite open to kind of discuss everything. And obviously, as I say, I had accountability partners, which is a great thing to do. I encourage people.
It's the difference between wanting to hear, in the sense, you're the expert, you're the safeguarding expert. Like, as a leader, I'm not. I've trusted you with this. Can you tell me how things are going? And then the check up is very much I know everything there is to know about safeguarding, or I know everything there is to know because I'm the leader. Just the assumption that some leaders seem to have. It's a really different vibe.
I think environment is also, I once had an office in a previous role, I don't just say that, but where there was no windows and it was just breeze blocks. And that was tough. I actually worked there for a fair few years, but that's nothing against the place. That's just the way the building was designed. Yeah. But when I did move office and I had a window, that was a game changer for me. That actually really helped with my mental health. Yeah, but it also helped with the students as well. I mean, the fact is, when you're taking them from a really tough situation, you're saying, right, this is a nice, safe environment. You're going, yeah, it's like a prison. It also needs to be a private and quiet space. I've had places where I've had to get an Alexa and put it into set it up. And I had to put it into a corridor just to make sure there was music playing so they could, like, people walking past wouldn't keep listening in. Yeah. I know that it's not that they wanted to, but the thing is, like, sometimes they could overhear something. And so, yeah, I think environment makes it. So that's the whole check-in, not check-up, the environment. And then the biggest one, you absolutely must, and it does stay in working together to safeguard children, that you should have access to high-quality supervision. Yep. That leaders need to make sure that supervision is put in place. And that there is a difference, and we'll just touch on it now, which is that you can have someone who works there as their line manager, but there's a difference between having a line manager and then having someone who's an external professional within 100% supervision to kind of lead it, because that way they feel a bit more at ease to be able to be a bit more honest. Yeah. There's an administrative kind of supervision, and then there is a well-being personal kind of care one.
Yeah, totally. And having experienced supervision is life-changing. To have it from an external source with someone who's trained to do it. Yeah, absolutely. Very different from a line manager. So, okay, so we're coming to the end of what we wanted to talk about. We've talked a little bit about action specifically for leaders, but more generally, I guess, what can the DSL or the DDSL do, or just what 3 action points can someone listening to this episode just take away?
Start off with awareness. Understand the signs. So I said earlier, obviously I was annoyed with myself, and I know there's going to be people out there saying, you don't need to be annoyed. Yes, I understand that, but at the time you do get annoyed in yourself.
I am annoyed. Stop telling me to not be annoyed.
I think it's awareness of the signs. Yeah. Know yourself, know your body, and if you are getting to a stage where you're getting tetchy, you're missing things, your sleep problems, you're not eating properly, okay, stop at that point. You are the most important people in this. We always say the first thing you do is safeguard yourself. This is the point. The whole point of this podcast today is to safeguard yourself. It's not just saying safeguard the DSL, although that's the name we're giving to it. It's a case of everyone on the front line. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're working in a situation where you're dealing with people who are vulnerable, and by the very nature of safeguarding, that's what will happen. You need to look after yourself. So that's awareness.
So awareness, and just on a leadership side, is communicating that awareness through to your staff.
Yes.
Just that active communication. All right. So then second point, in terms of leadership, investing in supervision, I think maybe that should be number 1. We're not doing this in any order.
You choose.
You choose. But also Cornerstone can provide supervision. So if you're interested, get the plug in there. That's why we're doing this. So that is a must as part of the policy and procedure. So do you get that in? Third one?
Okay. Self-care. So looking after yourself. So that's mindfulness, regular exercise, setting boundaries. We said that in our first podcast. Professional help when needed. Yeah. And you know what? I had this thing where I always said, I just don't have time for that. I'm too busy to go. No. When I started actually going, I'm going to go for walks. Yeah. When I started doing that, I was a game changer.
It is protecting that empathy, isn't it? It's that your self-process. But there's a phrase of, I've probably nicked it, to be fair, but it's a phrase I really like. It's healthy selfishness. I think there's a culture sometimes where you have self-care. I can't be selfish. That's bad. I actually need to be selfless. There's some more views that encourage that, but there's actually, even within that, you can't be selfless if you haven't got any self to give. And so be healthy in your selfishness and work on the emphasis on family, social life, whatever it is that gives you life that you can then get away from the stresses. So that's 3 points. That's everything we wanted to cover in this episode. There's loads more we could talk about. If you've got feedback, things that you would like to share with us, you can comment on most podcast platforms, so please feel free to do that. We'd love to hear from you. Any final thoughts, Chris?
I think actually those 3 points really summed up, which is awareness, know yourself, invest in your staff, and I like your word of healthy selfishness.
Yeah, nice. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll end there. See you soon.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Safeguarding Redefined. Remember, every voice matters. If you have a story to share or a question to ask, please let us know. To stay updated on the latest episodes and safeguarding news, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on LinkedIn or check out cornerstonesafeguarding.co.uk.